And this is what we know about the single best way to help people see different perspectives. There was a series of experiments that were done trying to understand how to move people on the political spectrum from being against gay marriage to for gay marriage. And they found the same thing that the doctors you mentioned that we talk about in the book about trying to help anti-vaxxers, trying to encourage them to at least think about vaccination. When the pandemic first started and we first got the vaccines, the National Institutes of Health, their recommendations were that if you have someone who comes into your office and you're a physician who's anti-vax, what you should do is just give them the facts. Like if you can tell them what the science says, then they're going to change their mind. They're going to see the wisdom of getting a vaccine. And every single doctor who actually worked with patients said that's the worst advice possible. Like these are not people who are making this choice out of ignorance. They have spent hours and hours and hours researching online. They have a dozen reasons to be against the vaccine. And so eventually NIH, with guidance from these physicians, changed their recommendations and said, okay, what you should do is this thing called motivational interviewing. And this is what's worked in a political setting also. Ask them to tell you personal stories about how they see this issue and simply listen. And ask follow-up questions. Do not try and convince them of anything else. Do not do anything besides try to understand how they see the world, particularly rooted in their personal experience, because we're all experts on ourselves. And then, if you'd like to, tell a personal story about yourself and go ahead and say, this is a personal story. I'm not talking about studies. I'm just talking about myself. And in fact, in the book, we talk about this one woman, Dr. Chamay, who works in Oregon, and a patient comes in and he says, I don't want to get the vaccine because I'm very religious and I wash my hands and I wear the mask and I think God will take care of me. If God wants me to be healthy, I will be healthy. And she asks him a couple questions and she says, oh my gosh, it's so impressive how personal your relationship with God is. And then she says, sometimes as a physician, I'm very thankful because God helped us find these vaccines. And this is just talking for me. One of the things that's been hard for me is that sometimes I know that you're a grandfather, that you have grandkids, and I'm sure you love your grandkids the same way I love my kids and you worry about them. Sometimes kids come in and they're already sick and they ask for help. They ask for the vaccine and it's too late for me to give it to them. But thank you so much for coming in today. I feel like I learned so much about you. And then she leaves the room. And 5 minutes later, that guy asks for a vaccine. And the same thing happens with political conversations. There was a series of experiments that were done in California where they were trying to move people's opinions on gay marriage. And they went into Republican areas and they talked to people who were opposed to gay marriage. And instead of trying to make a plea to them, instead of trying to make it the case for gay marriage, the pollster simply asked them how they felt about this issue, if they knew anyone who was gay, how they felt about marriage, like why marriage was important to them. And then they would engage in things such as like proving that they're listening. They would ask deep questions. They would prove that they're listening through a technique known as looping for understanding that we can talk about. And what they found was that once people felt like they had been listened to, when the pollster would then say, I hear what you're saying about marriage, right? Like, I think that marriage is this sanctified relationship between people. And actually, I myself, I am gay and I want to have that sanctified relationship with my husband. I want this to be something that we can pledge ourselves to each other for the rest of our lives. It's at that moment that people became more understanding and also malleable in their political holdings. We actually saw a 3 to 5% shift in the political opinion among that group, which is in politics is like off the charts.
I wonder if that goes the other way to issues that for the group that may have been advocating gay marriage would probably have a harder time seeing, like, what if a group of very staunch Second Amendment absolutists, and I say absolutists in a neutral way, meaning someone who really believes that the Second Amendment should extend to almost no government oversight and or regulation of the right to bear arms in whatever form that you choose. Could you imagine a similar scenario where a group animated by that as a strong both moral principle and constitutional right sways a group who believes that there should be far more regulation?
There's actually a chapter in the book about precisely that, about an experiment that was done that brought together.
I apologize for having missed that chapter.
Yeah. An experiment that brought together gun rights advocates and gun control activists. And again, what they found was the measure of whether this conversation is successful is not how much you persuade the other person. Even in the case that I just mentioned with gay marriage, it's a 3 to 5% shift. That is not a huge shift. In politics, it's enormous. But that means that for every 100 people that they spoke to, 3, maybe 5 of them changed their mind a little bit. But again, the goal of a conversation is not to convince the other person they are wrong and you are right. The goal of a conversation is to understand the other person better, to have some type of connection with them, even if that doesn't transcend to changing their mind. And I guarantee you, having had these conversations myself with Second Amendment activists, you walk away from them not necessarily thinking like, oh, we should, have no regulations on guns, but thinking like, I understand why this person is so passionate about guns. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The people I grew up around, guns were integral to their relationship with their father. I have a number of relatives who go deer hunting every single year. And this is one of the most important moments in their year is to go deer hunting. And they feel strongly about their right to own rifles that allow them to do that. And that doesn't mean that I think that they should be unregulated. It doesn't mean that I agree with them or that I vote the same way they do. But it does mean that I understand why they feel the way they do. And when you understand how someone sees the world, it's harder to demonize their perspectives and force them into a caricature.
They become a lot more rational in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah.